how the Spartans would get others to do all of their labor for them, all the public shaming that would go down if you didn't live up to the standards set by society, and the only way that it was acceptable to die. All of this on today's most amazing top 10 list. Coming in at number 10, we have the Spartans, enslaved people. Every movie about ancient Greece will paint the Spartans as these noble, unbeatable men who led armies that could crush anyone, even if they were outnumbered 1,000 to 1. But when you go back in time, you will find that the morals of any human were pretty scarce, especially when you're comparing them to today's standards. The Spartans were known to conquer and enslave the people they defeated in war. The group who might have gotten this the worst was the Helots, another group of Greeks that had a much smaller civilization than the Spartans, and they didn't really stand a chance when it came to fighting. The Spartans would attack them annually to take people to work in their fields and also make sure their forces would never reach the point where they were strong enough to defeat the Spartans. This worked in twofold, keeping the enemy down and keeping your fields full of free labor. One of the worst aspects of this was when the Spartans would utilize the Cryptia. Think of them as the most elite force in Sparta that would be sent out into cities to lay down Spartan law, like the Justice League, but they're all evil. This group would round up the strongest and least submissive Helots and chop their heads off. This way the Helots would never grow a strong enough army to fight back against the Spartans, and they wouldn't have anyone who is whispering words of rebellion against them. And guys, make sure you hit that like button because it really helps us out. Next on the list, guys, we have starting them young. One thing the movies didn't lie about was that the Spartan culture didn't waste any time in exposing boys to blood, warfare, and brutality. As soon as a boy turned 7, it was time for him to join the ranks of the army and be trained to be a killing machine. They would be taken from their home and brought to a training facility that did one thing and one thing only: make people Spartans. Everything they read, everything they held, everything they experienced was to make them better at warfare. This was how they were able to make some of the best warriors of all time. One of the most famous aspects of this was how troops were fed. Everyone would be given just enough food. This would make sure that you didn't eat so much that you were plump and tired, but not so little that you were hungry, but also so you weren't starving but you still wanted more. It was this perfect balance, almost like you needed to fight to prove yourself in order to get your next meal. It's a very clever tactic to make sure that your warriors are not only sharp but determined to fight. Coming in at number 8, we have tough love. You know that scene in 300 when they're holding the baby and checking to see if it has any impurities, checking to see if it's indeed worthy, and if not, they're going to get rid of it for lack of a better term? Well, that was how they actually did things. Now, it wasn't as dramatic as the movie. There was no lightning and mountain that was fit to be Olympus. What they would actually do was leave the baby out in the wilderness, and it's thought that some of these babies were actually rescued by travelers. But the tough love didn't stop there. If you were chosen to be one of the strong, then you would have to be tested to be a tough as nails baby. Even as a baby, you never got shot, man. If you cried, no one would respond to you, and you would be constantly left alone. Before you even had memories, your body would be conditioned to deal with pain and solitude. And if you think that this was a brutal practice of its time, well, it was, but it was something that all of the surrounding regions loved. It's said that Spartan nannies were the greatest in all of Greece because they knew how to raise a strong child. Coming in at number 7, we have closed the borders. Spartans had a massive superiority complex when it came to the rest of Greece. They were convinced that they were the best in the whole country and possibly the world, and in some aspects they were. They were skilled in warfare, far beyond any of their neighbors, but just because you can win a fight doesn't mean you have all the other aspects figured out. But because of this hubris, they shut down trade to all of their neighboring regions. There are sections of Sparta that are surrounded by mountains, which made it easy for them to control the trade routes coming in and out of their country. Eventually, the surrounding leadership was like, fine dude, we won't do any business with you if you're gonna be like that. We're not gonna fight you on this. Sparta thought that having no foreign influence would have strengthened their people. They would no longer be hindered by the weaker foreign ideals. Well, they were dead wrong. All the areas that Spartan wasn't the strongest in, like bronze work, scripture, sculpting, and many of the other elements of a strong, prosperous city, were lost and they fell behind big time. Bronze work being the most crucial because it related directly to warfare. Coming in number 6, we have reduced their culture to a tourist attraction. The once mighty people were eventually not what they used to be, and people were no longer afraid of them. People would travel far and wide to come to Sparta to see the wonders of what was one of the greatest nations in the world. Now, they were on top for over 300 years, but after the Romans came in and shut them down, it was time for things to change. These tales of Sparta from the past would give people the inspiration to come and see the wondrous land and what it was like. And the new Spartans living there now made money not off of warfare, but off of selling the old tales of their ancestors. I mean, it's not as brutal as some of the other things on this list, but it's sad to see a once great warrior nation reduced to a museum. Coming in number 5, we have You Had to Be Hot. Spartans had very strict rules on how you're supposed to look, especially for the men. Here's a very strange tradition that the Spartans had that would give anyone body dysmorphia and an eating disorder. Every 10 days, the Spartan men would walk out of their house naked. They would stand there perfectly tall and wait for someone to come through and give their body a rundown. This person would look at every inch of them to see how their muscle tone was, to see if their body fat was up to par. Now, if it wasn't, they would be beaten and shamed by their peers. It was actually seen as a public offense. You're a Spartan and you need to be in shape to protect your homeland, so if you weren't, it wasn't just letting yourself go, but you were making the whole country weaker and easier to invade. So the public pressure to always be in shape was massive. Not to mention the beating would have been pretty severe. You wouldn't want to have to get a major whooping every 10 days from a group of men who are some of the best warriors in the world. Alright guys, coming in next at number 4, we have hazing. It's not just frat boys and sorority girls who like to haze, it was the entire Spartan race. Now, mind you, the hazing that goes on in American colleges isn't to build up some of the strongest warriors in the world. Most of the guys who come out of there have soft bodies who can barely swing a golf club, but for the Spartans, this was how they would weed out weakness. If the elders saw that one of the younger men in training was afraid of something or avoided something, they would point it out to the group and encourage the others to ridicule them for it. And if things got really out of hand, they would encourage fighting. Could you imagine being at school or college and then two people break out in a fist fight and one of the professors walks out and starts cheering fight with everyone else? That sounds like a bad comedy from the 90s, but for Spartans, that was real life. Treatment like this ensured that there was pressure from peers to be the strongest possible. Coming in at number 3, we have public shaming. So it should be no surprise that Spartans had more than one way to shame you if you didn't follow the laws. A big thing they didn't like was cowardice. I mean, I think you could have figured that one out. And if you were caught being a coward, they would make sure that everyone in Sparta knew what was wrong with you. They would make you wear certain clothes that were marked with the sign of a coward, and they would make you shave half your beard. I think this was more for the humiliation factor. Walking around with half a beard would make you look so stupid. Also, it would be super hard to miss. I've never seen someone with half their facial hair and thought, you know, if I wasn't paying attention, I would have totally missed that. No, it's something that sticks out a lot, and it makes sense why they would punish you in this way for cowardice. They were a warrior society, so they needed everyone to be strong or their society would crumble because the backbone of it was fighting, and social stigma was probably the biggest way you can get people to comply with the laws. Coming in number 2, we have lifelong allegiance to the army. Could you imagine if when you were born the government already had a job for you and you had to be involved in it from the time you were 7 all the way up until you were 60, unless you died or were seriously injured and could no longer use your body properly? Well, that was the life of every Spartan man. By law, every dude had to join the army. Now, this wasn't for every single person in Sparta. This was only for the Spartan citizens. So even though it would have been nice to be born into such a high respected class of people, your life would have been stripped away from you and all you would know is war and battle. Now, there was a lower class living in Sparta that was usually doing crafting and architecture. They were not respected enough to be considered Spartans and accepted into the army. And coming in at the number 1 spot, we have dying in battle. The only way you could be remembered after you passed was if you died in battle, and that was for men. For women, it was if you died in childbirth. There were strict laws in Spartan society that said if you died in any other way, that you would be buried in an unmarked grave or not even buried at all. So that meant that you either join the army or become nothing. Public shaming for missing battles or becoming too old to die in battle would often result in people taking their own life. Yeah, you didn't want to be the old fart at a party in Spartan society because no one would respect you. Alright guys, that has been our list. Thank you all so much for tuning in. As always, I'd love it if you could like, comment, subscribe, and hit the little notification bell. Until next time, I've been your host, Chad Arena. We'll catch you on the next one. The hormones, baby.
New baby boom coming up.
New baby boom. Okay.
The COVID boom.